Why is this couple smiling? Perhaps they found hope, meaning, and purpose in the book of Revelation. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a lonely man on a distant island received a remarkable vision. Some readers have been frightened by his vision, but many more have found in it the hope, meaning, and purpose they were looking for. And now, here are your hosts, Dr. John Pauline and Dr. Graham Bradford.
Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Graham.
And welcome to Revelation, Hope, Meaning, Purpose. Graham, you want to bring us up to date on where we've been?
I'll be happy to do that, John. So far we've been looking at the 7 churches, and we were looking at Ephesus and Smyrna last time. And Ephesus was a church which had lost its first love and had to recover that love. And Smyrna was a suffering church. And we also mentioned that not all churches had the same experience. There are some who have problems without opposition, like Smyrna, but there are other churches we're going to see also have problems within. And so not every church is the same, and we saw how Jesus can relate to all these churches in a way that is meaningful to them.
So Ephesus was kind of having problems within, and Smyrna was more facing
External.
Problems without.
Right.
Pergamum is the one we're coming to this time. What is that like?
This is a problem where Christians are making wrong decisions because of external pressure, which causes problems
So
within.
it's kind of a blend of both.
Actually, yeah, it's how they react to it. Yeah, how they react to it.
Where will we find Pergamum on a map?
Okay, let's look at Pergamum on the map, and we can see that just going north of Smyrna, we have Pergamum today. That city up there is, we're going to look at it now shortly, just to do a B-roll over it too, and have a look at the city of Pergamum just north of Smyrna.
So this is one of the most spectacular sites of all these 7 churches, isn't it?
It really is. It is really a great place. Even just for tourists who are not interested in the Bible, they go there. Yeah, spectacular.
Can't wait to see it again.
Okay, let's have a look.
Yeah.
This is the Citadel of Pergamum from below. It's a spectacular view over 250 meters above sea level.
You can get some idea of the beauty of this site from this view of the reservoir, which was developed just fairly recently.
And now we're standing in front of the entrance and we can see some of the fortifications.
You know, this place looks absolutely awesome. What do you say we go have a look?
I agree.
All right. The greatest vulnerability of Pergamum is the fact that it's on such a high hill. It's a lack of water. And so here you're looking at the cistern, a huge cistern in which water would be stored in case of siege. How did they get the water here? It's really cool. There was an aqueduct that came from a mountain that was just a little bit higher than this site, and the water ran down in the valley, as you can see, and went all the way up by pressure, all the way up the hill.
Emperor worship was a very big thing in the ancient world, and this is a temple of Trajan, begun 3 years after Revelation was written. It wasn't there, of course, when John wrote his book, but it gives us an idea of how important was emperor worship. Augustus was the one who first accepted it. He didn't want it, but Pergamum was the first invited emperor worship.
Here we're looking at the site of the altar of Zeus. This was one of the most spectacular parts of ancient Pergamum, and as you can see, it was actually taken up by archaeologists and is now housed in a museum in Berlin. But this was the site where it likely was, and some scholars think this is what John was talking about when he talked about the seat of Satan.
And this is the theatre where 15,000 people could be seated at any one time. It is possible for a person to go right down the bottom and whisper, and their voice can be heard at the back. For Christians, this was a test. Should they go to the theatre where often the plays were very immoral?
This is the last stop on our tour of the Acropolis of Pergamum. We're looking down over the valley, and as you look out there, you can see the Asclepion, which is an ancient medical school and a place where people went to find healing. Why don't we go have a look down there?
Well, John, I tell you, that's incredible up there, isn't it? The whole mountainside has been used for the Citadel, and looking for the healing centre, wow.
That is amazing.
Yeah, I reckon.
And what we have here is an old Roman road. They say all roads lead to Rome. Well,
Right.
Eventually, if you go this way, you would get to Rome.
A long way, though.
But this healing center is interesting. It's called Asclepion. The symbol of it was actually a snake. The Asclepion is the doctor's symbol you sometimes see in offices today.
Right.
And that may be a reason why some Christians thought of this place as the seat of Satan. You know, we're not sure exactly what that was.
Right.
But it was a healing place, a medical school. People were trained here. Graham?
Why are you looking at me like that?
You're not looking so good. You're okay?
Well, I am feeling the heat.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, maybe you've come to the right place. Maybe they can help you here.
This drink up here might help me at the fountain.
Yeah. Let's give it a shot.
I'll give it a try,
All right.
yeah. So this is the gate where they used to accept patients, and I've heard that the patient had to come here by their own strength. If they couldn't make it alone, they wouldn't accept them.
You mean all down that road?
All that road on your own strength, yeah, otherwise you wouldn't be accepted.
Well, I think you've got a pretty good chance.
Well, I'm just going to make it.
All right. Let's go in.
Okay. I'll give it a try. Whew.
How you feeling now, Graham?
Oh, great. Here is where the young doctors were taken and given instruction in the art of medicine. It's also a place where they took the patients, and we're dealing with something like a form of psychosomatic medicine. It is said that the patients at some stage were inhaling drugs through smoke they inhaled, and also they heard a voice saying all the time, "You're going to be healed, you're going to be healed, you're going to be healed." So it is believed it was an early form of mind-body psychosomatic medicine. It was here in this tunnel that the patient's mind was prepared for the healing. And you hear the water, they would hear the soothing sound of the effect of the water, and from these walls would come smoke which they would inhale, which would give them have a drug-like effect upon them, and they would also hear voices that telling them they were going to be healed. And
Graham, you're feeling better. You're gonna get well.
I feel I'm being conned.
I'd say that was just a little bit of payback for what you did to me in Ephesus, you know.
Well, we'll try and even up the ledger, all right?
That's all right. Well, Pergamum was a really magnificent city.
Yeah.
And in our book, the book of Revelation, there's a letter that comes from Jesus, and that letter is designed to be a benefit to the church. Would you read it for us?
Sure, I'll be happy to read it. All right, we have here Revelation chapter 2, and reading here in verses 12 to 17. To the angel of the church in Pergamum write, "These are the words of him who has the sharp, double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. Yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city where Satan lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. You have people there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin by eating food sacrificed to idols and by committing sexual immorality. Likewise, you also have those who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Repent, therefore, otherwise I will soon come to you and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give him a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to him who receives it."
It must have been challenging for Christians to live in a place like Pergamum. I mean, the architecture's magnificent. It's more broken down than Ephesus is right now, but you just get a glimpse of how incredible it must have been back at that time. And this is the pagan worship. People are walking by that every day, and their neighbors are saying, "Isn't that great? You know, why aren't you part of that?"
Yeah, looking up and seeing the temple and the amphitheater.
Yeah. Well, apparently a governor of Rome and an emperor exchanged some letters about the Christians at that time and what to do about it. And we've invited a scholar, Teresa Reeve, who's an expert in that specific area, to talk to us a little bit about that exchange of letters and some of the implications it has for our topic.
Sure. Okay, let's look.
In the New Testament, we have many documents which help us to understand how the earliest followers of Jesus understood their own beliefs and experiences. But we have very little direct information that tell us about how the Romans themselves viewed and handled this belief in Jesus. The first Roman documents that we have that mention Christians are a couple of official letters written in about 110 AD, not long after the writing of the book of Revelation, between Pliny and Trajan. These give us a glimpse of what Romans knew or thought they knew about Christians and how they treated them, at least in this corner of the world. Now, Pliny had been appointed by Trajan as the governor of Pontus and Bithynia, which are two Roman provinces in the north-central, what we would now know as north-central Turkey. In his letter, Pliny asks Trajan's wishes about how he should deal with Christians. And it seems that Pliny assumes that Christians should be prosecuted. He's just not sure about the ways to go about it. So he mentions to Trajan, he's not sure, for example, the extent or the nature of the punishment that they should receive. He's not sure whether he should bring children into court. He's not sure how to go about opening an inquiry of Christians, and whether he should pardon Christians if they deny Christ. He goes on then to tell Trajan what he has been doing thus far. And this is valuable for us as Christian historians and in trying to understand the Bible, because this is the earliest mention that we have from Romans about how they treated Christians. So Pliny tells Trajan that the first thing he does is to ask the Christian or the accused if they are a Christian, if they're a Christ follower. If the person says, yes, I am, and persists in saying that, then Pliny says he sends them to execution. The exception to that is that if they say that they are Christians, but they're Roman citizens, then he sends them to Rome for a full trial in Rome, because Roman citizens are not to be tried outside of Rome. If the accused person says, no, I'm not a Christian, or I used to be a Christian, but I'm not anymore, then Pliny had a little process that he used. He first of all asked them to invoke the gods. He gave an invocation of the gods, and he asked them to repeat it after him. He would also ask them to offer incense and wine to a statue of the emperor, to treat the emperor as a god. And the third thing that he would do is to ask them to curse the name of Christ, because he had heard that a true Christian would never curse Jesus' name. So Trajan gets this letter and he writes back to Pliny, and he affirms Pliny's policy. He says, you're doing a good job, you're doing the right thing. He agrees with Trajan that they shouldn't be sought out, but if they did, they were brought to Pliny, that he should go ahead and prosecute, and if they were Christians, they should indeed be punished. This is valuable. This pair of letters is very valuable to us, because this is the first information we have directly from a Roman, or a couple of Romans, that helps us to see from the Roman perspective how Christians were understood, and also how Christians were treated, at least in this part of Asia Minor, in Pliny's province, and also how one Roman emperor viewed Christians, that yes, they should be prosecuted if they're brought to court.
Oh, that's very interesting. Now,
Pressure.
What you have here is a strong motivation for Christians to compromise their faith.
Absolutely,
You see, because not only there's a spectacular architecture there, but also you have this social pressure. And I think one of the backgrounds to this, it mentions here, of course, Antipas is a martyr. And may have gone through the process, which what was described here was just 10 years later in the same region. But here's the thing. What the Romans expected was that everyone would take part in the civil religion. Like for the Americans, the 4th of July, and I think you have Boxing Day, is it something like that?
Yeah.
And so there's a civil religion. It's what everybody's expected to do, but the civil religion was special in that it involved immorality, going to the temple to have sex with a prostitute, or eating foods that had been offered to idols. You see? Now, no Christian worth their salt would do that. That's the problem that's faced in Pergamum and in many of the other areas at that time. The idea behind that was that by involving oneself in these activities, you'd bring rain and the whole place would prosper. And your neighbors would say, if you're not doing this, you're the reason we have a drought. You're the reason we're getting poor. You're the reason the enemies are coming.
Enormous pressure.
Exactly. So when we come back, we will take a look at a time in Christian history when this type of compromise became very deadly for the church.
Welcome back. John, before we start, I have a serious correction to make. You really got something wrong, and I'm sorry, I compromised by not correcting you. It's so easy to compromise.
I have no idea.
But as an Australian, I have to correct you.
Okay.
Boxing Day doesn't matter. It's Anzac Day. Anzac Day, our young folk, our people turn out to support our troops, so I just thought I ought to say, I'm sorry, I compromised last time, but anyway.
I just wanted to see if you knew that.
It's easy to compromise, though, isn't it? Under pressure.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're looking now here at false teaching and Pergamos and Pergamum, sometimes called Pergamos. And false teaching, John, is dangerous. It's dangerous because it can cause a person to lose their hold upon Christ. Correct teaching and doctrine, just as like one-upmanship, means nothing. Mm-hmm. What really matters is that true teaching should help you to keep your relationship to Jesus. That's why it's important. And something went wrong.
If you have the wrong idea about something, it can, the danger of that, people think, oh, a little bit of compromise, but the danger of it is that you run off track. I came into the Denver airport not too long ago, and all of the monitors were fine. Departure monitors. Everything was fine, except it was 100% incorrect information. The gate numbers, the flight times, and so on. I was sitting at this gate, waiting for my flight, wondering why nobody was there. And then I asked the flight attendant who came by, he said, oh no, the monitors, don't trust them, they're all messed up. Your gate is way at the other end of the airport, I get down there, and that was the wrong gate. And so, you see, to have correct information is critical to making the right decisions in life. And that's why Jesus, I think, was so concerned about it here in Pergamum.
Yeah, and we're going to see this as we unfold our way through Revelation more and more, how important it is. This book was given for a very important reason, to help us to keep our right relationship with Jesus, because it is so easy to compromise and lose your way. And this happened.
Is there a time in Christian history when the church kind of lost its way with some of this?
Yeah, early in the piece we find that what happened at Pergamon was reflected in the larger church at large. And so much so that, we look upon that as an era which, particularly in Western Christianity, and it also happened in the East too. A lot of compromise took place. And so this man that you are aware of has written a book on this, is that right?
Yeah, there's a colleague of mine in one of the major scholarly societies. I think he teaches at North Carolina University. Bart Ehrman is his name. And he wrote a book called Lost Christianities. And he lays out in this book how the New Testament allows for a variety of ways of working out the ways of Christ, and that it resulted in a number of different expressions of Christianity early on. But there came a period under the time of the Emperor Constantine when all the other options were snuffed out. And then only one option was allowed, and Constantine was very concerned to unify the empire under Christianity and to find ways to attract the pagans in. So sometimes pagan practices were baptized, so to speak, were brought in. And so you had this kind of a compromise type of situation developing. And so Ehrman is a secular scholar. He himself does not claim to be a believer, but he says, as I look at Christianity today, I see many things that have been lost along the way. And I thought that's a very significant observation for a scholar to make.
Sure. And one of the pressures, a big pressure, was really to compromise with sun worship and Mithraism, of which Constantine had been involved, particularly through his mother. And we're going to put a quote up here now from a very famous scholar, Jaquita Hawkes. And she says this in her book called Man and the Sun. And she says here, I do not think it would be an exaggeration to say that in the 4th century, and for some time afterwards, there was for many people of the Western Empire a total confusion between the state Christianity and the state sun worship it displaced. Now, John, this was a time of confusion. In fact, many people thought that Christians were involved in sun worship. That was the norm. So it was a time of pressure, compromise, and confusion. And Constantine wished to commend Christianity to the empire to keep it together, as you've said. This was anticipated in the Bible. The Bible said that there would be problems come into the church. And so we have a statement here in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, where Peter makes this statement. But there were also false prophets among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you. They will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the sovereign Lord who bought them, bringing swift destruction on themselves. Many will follow their shameful ways and will bring the way of truth into disrepute. In their greed, these teachers will exploit you with stories they have made up. Their condemnation has long been hanging over them, and their destruction has not been sleeping. So John, Peter is really stirred over this one, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's really stirred because this is going to bring in a destructive heresy. Interesting, isn't it?
And this is a prophecy, all right? He's looking forward and saying, this is coming. Keep an eye out for it.
This is going to happen. And just as it happened with Israel, there was compromise, and so we have the Christian church facing similar problems, compromise. This Pergamum experience becomes a wider experience in the church, east and west, you'd say, wouldn't you, really?
Can you unpack a little of that history a bit
more?
Sure.
Constantine was a very important part of this, and let's have a picture now of his conversion story. And you can see his conversion story here is where he's explaining. This is a painting going back to where Constantine is describing how he was actually converted. And if you look to the top of the screen, you'll see the sun's rays coming through and down, and Constantine won this battle, and he claimed that he was given the victory because of the cross of Christ. But mingled with the cross of Christ, of course, you can see the rays of the sun coming forth. And so Constantine, to him, this was a political thing. Now, Mithraism, we can see Mithra slaying the sacred bull here. This was very powerful, particularly amongst the Roman army. And Mithra was the idea of sun worship, and Mithra was slaying the sacred bull. But Constantine himself, this was a change taking place in the Christian church in the 4th century. Our picture here now shows you how Christ was viewed as Helios ascending to heaven. This is a mosaic going right back to the 4th century. And it shows you how people were viewing Christ at that time. So, as Jaquita Hawkes says, in the empire at large, there was a state of confusion. You know, it's very hard for a church in culture, isn't it? What do you pick up from culture? What do you leave? Where do you lay off compromise? Compromise is a...
Well, Mithraism, I would think, that particular form of paganism would have been very attractive because you did have baptisms, you had sacrifices where people, sacrifices would be kind of on a screen and people would walk under it and the blood would drip on them. And it would be picking up that image of salvation through the blood of the sacrifice.
Right, and Mithraism also had the 25th of December as the birthday
You're kidding me.
Oh, no, you check your encyclopedias.
You sure that wasn't Boxing Day?
Let's keep it simple. No, it was really the birthday of the sun, because the sun days were getting shorter, and the sun had new life coming back in, and you check your history books and encyclopedia. Yeah.
So the Christmas, as we think of it, is around the shortest time of the year, the shortest days of the year. So the sun is coming back
to life.
The sun is coming to life. There's a death and resurrection of the sun. That is
it's amazing
involved in all
where
this.
Things come from, because no one knows when Christ was born exactly. There are many different dates that people speculate on, but this was an easy transition for people to move from the S-U-N to the S-O-N.
Oh, okay.
And also, they also had the Sunday, or the Day of the Sun, as like a holiday, a festival type of thing too. So Sunday was a part of this Mithraism cult as well. It's amazing how we inherit things from the past and we never really often think or stop to check. Like you ask Australians what Boxing Day is all about, and they wouldn't have a clue. And you ask Christians, well, is this the time when Christ was really born? And so, of course, what else? And so we do accept a lot of our past, don't we, without ever thinking seriously about it. So things happened back in that early century where this experience at Pergamum, became a wider type of compromise experience in the Christian church, and this has been passed on to us without us ever thinking too much about some of these practices. Yeah.
Well, I do think compromise probably is the most dangerous when you don't even know it's happening. I think the whole point of this letter is that we have to be watchful.
Yeah.
You know, if you're just drifting along, you may say, you know, I'm a good person. You know, I go
and they
to
were
church.
Good people. Many of these were good people, John.
I give contributions to the church. I'm not a bad person. I'm okay. It's when you're just sort of drifting along, and then you may take in things and just not even realize the unintended consequence.
All of us can have
the impact that these things could have. So with the Church of Pergamos, and also we see early in Christian history, there was this danger of compromise that was faced at that point. We're now going to go to the break, and when we come back, we're going to move to another church, the Church of Thyatira. See you then.
Welcome back. We're now going to continue with our look at the city of Thyatira, and we're going to bring up the map to show you how it is that we've been journeying so far from Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum to Thyatira. There's not much to see, but we're going to give you a look at what we did see when we went there. A city is built over at the present time, which makes it awkward. What do you do, John, when you have people living there? You can't just move them aside. You shouldn't even think it, should you? But it is a city that is dwelt over by another city, and there's just a little bit we have to show you now. Okay, let's have a look at what we saw.
Well, this is where the city of Thyatira was. We're sorry we haven't got anything to show you. We just have a bit of a Roman road going through here. Unfortunately, this city didn't have natural defences like Pergamon, but we do find it was caught up between other nations in crossroads of being destroyed, rebuilt many times. And if you look over here, you'll see how the city has been rebuilt, and the elevation, they just take the old parts of the city that they've destroyed and they use it to build upon for the new one. So this is about all we can show you from Thyatira.
There are a couple of things about Thyatira that are of interest to those who study the Bible. First of all, this was famous throughout the ancient world for trade guilds. These would be almost like labor unions of people that were working with brass, working with various metals, working with linen, tanning leather, and so forth. Thyatira was a crossroads. That's the reason that there was a city here. It wasn't particularly defensible, but it was natural that things could be made here, things could be sold here. Another element that's of interest is that Thyatira is famous for a dye that came from ground up mollusk shells. And it was a magnificent reddish purple dye that made beautiful cloths, royal robes and so forth. Lydia, a character in the book of Acts, was from Thyatira, and she was a seller of purple. So Thyatira is one of the 3 cities mentioned in Revelation that are found elsewhere in the New Testament.
All right, that was a short tour. But Jesus had a very important message for this church. And Revelation chapter 2 records this message, doesn't it?
That's right. And we're going to take some selections of this particular text because it's a long one. To the angel of the Church of Thyatira write, "These are the words of the Son of God, whose eyes are like blazing fire and whose feet are like burnished bronze. I know your deeds, your love and faith, your service and perseverance, and that you are now doing more than you did at first. Nevertheless, I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess. By her teaching, she misleads my servants into sexual immorality and the eating of food sacrificed to idols. I have given her time to repent of her immorality, but she is unwilling. Now I say to the rest of you in Thyatira, to you who do not hold her teaching and have not learned Satan's so-called deep secrets, hold on to what you have until I come." So it's interesting here, and we look at this text, he's talking about Jezebel, and people have wondered, what on earth is this Jezebel? The assumption normally is that Jezebel must have been a leader of the local church, somebody that was moving the church in a direction that was contrary to what John and Jesus were attempting to accomplish here. But the interesting thing about it is Jezebel is actually a name from the Older Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Jezebel was a queen of ancient Israel, and what she did was combine the worship of the true God with the worship of Baal, a Canaanite goddess, a Canaanite god, which was the worship of where she came from. So the king of Israel married this pagan princess, and she brought her religion in and mixed it in with the religion that Ahab had, that the people of Israel had worked with. And so you're having a blend of true and false elements, and this becomes a model of the church leader in the time of John. Now, interestingly enough, scholars have also pointed out that Jezebel, in a sense, can be connected also with Babylon in chapter 17. You have these two women that are basically doing the same thing. Babylon at the end of time, this Jezebel in John's day, and perhaps also in the course of church history. So you have using the Old Testament as a model for something that's going on in the time when John writes. Now, there's different types of falsehood that can occur. And John here, through Jesus, is accusing this Jezebel of falsehood. One type of falsehood is to misguide somebody. This is the person who is sincere, but just crazy. You know, their ideas don't really make sense. The second type is conscious falsehood. The person knows that they're lying. They know that they're misleading you. They do it on purpose. The third type is flattery. And flattery is where you're deceiving somebody else in a desire to please them in some way. You're saying something you don't really believe, but you're almost talking yourself into believing it for the sake of the situation. And then finally, there's missing the mark, an intellectual mistake. So there's a number of these. The early church was tempted to make these kind of mistakes. And let's go to one of our scholars, Robert McIver, who will tell us a little bit more about those days.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. The Roman emperors were flattered by all kinds of people. Some of them even welcomed being called God, or one of the gods. One can't say just God, one of the gods. They lived in a society where there were many gods, they thought. This was something that was particularly common in the Eastern Greek-speaking part of the empire, where there had long been a tradition where the rulers were seen as one of the gods or semi-divine. And so some emperors were comfortable and others were a bit embarrassed, but most of them tolerated emperor worship, where a city would set up a temple and a statue to the emperor, and there would be a civic celebration of the Roman Empire with the emperor as its head. This was very difficult for Jews and Christians because, unlike most of the nations that they lived amongst, these two groups believed that there was only one true God and that it was wrong to worship anybody but the one true God. So when they were asked to participate in a test of loyalty to the state, which would be to offer, say, something like incense to the emperor as God, most of them could not do this, and many of them died because they refused to do this.
Well, I think it's pretty clear from that true biblical faith just cannot compromise with things that would point to other gods, shall we say.
That's true. And Jezebel is mentioned here for a very significant reason, as you pointed out. Jezebel, you know, it's important to understand why John is referring to Jezebel here. You've mentioned a little bit more, but he's also giving us a very important clue as to how we should read the book of Revelation. Okay. And coming up after the break, we're going to deal with a very crucial subject as to how we should be reading the book of Revelation, given the clues that John gives us here and there. And the mention of Jezebel itself sets us off into another subject altogether. So this is going to be important. Coming up after the break, how we read the book of Revelation as we relate to Jezebel and other characters like Balaam, has been mentioned earlier, coming up after the break. Don't miss it.
Welcome back. When we were just here with you last time, we were talking about the fact that in many, many ways, the book of Revelation grounds itself in things that were happening in the Old Testament. And one of the key aspects of that is the idea of covenant. Now, that's a term that's occasionally used in the modern world, but it isn't known all that much, and perhaps a more common word that is somewhat related would be the idea of contract. The idea that there's an agreement, a legal agreement between two individuals or between two countries, or perhaps between, in the case of the Bible, God and the people. The covenant is something that God provides for the people. And you go back into the Old Testament, and one of the great covenants is found in Genesis chapter 12 and verses 1 to 3. It was the foundation covenant between God and Israel. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." You see, there was a whole world that was in need of God's blessing, according to this text. And Abraham is called to be that blessing to the world. God intends to help the whole world through Abraham. Now, this covenant is extended, isn't it, Graham, in a later book?
Yes, we find that this covenant is a very important dynamic of dealing with and understanding the book of Revelation, and as it unfolds through Scripture. And in Exodus chapter 19, we find that God renews this covenant with the nation of Israel, which he had made with their ancestor Abraham. And in Exodus 19 and verses 5 to 6, we read, "Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you'll be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you'll be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you shall speak to the Israelites."
Now, you see, covenant is a lot like a contract. It governs relationships, and it provides security. If you have a contract, you know how the other person's supposed to behave. You know how you're supposed to behave. Now, God had, in a sense, a covenant with Israel in which he desired Israel to be a priest to all the nations. God was going to use Israel to reach out and bless the whole world. Now, that never really happened in Old Testament times. And so the vision of the New Testament is that when God sent Jesus, Jesus became Israel in that sense. He had 12 disciples, just like Israel had 12 tribes.
Right.
Jesus now becomes that covenant partner of God with Israel. And this now expands the covenant.
Right.
You see, because the covenant now is not just between God and one nation, but it is now between God and anybody who's in relationship with Jesus Christ. You see, so this expands it. It's not anti-Judaism. It's simply saying that the original piece where a nation was going to go out and bless the world didn't complete the task. And now God is going to use Jesus and those who are in relationship to him.
Right, so it moves from ethnic to spiritual, local to worldwide.
And why don't you read 1 Peter 2, where it gives a text that actually shows how it takes Exodus 16 and applies it to the Christian people.
Sure, I'll be happy to read it. 1 Peter 2, 9 to 10. "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Hey, that's exciting. That's exciting,
Yeah.
isn't it? And
this is not cutting out the place of the Jews, but it's adding to them any Gentile, any non-Jew who is in relationship with Jesus can be part of that mission to go out to the whole world.
the key is being in Jesus.
Yeah.
And God accepts everybody, regardless of race or what country you live in. The only question is, do you belong to Jesus?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now here's the important implication for how we read prophecy. This is what you set up in the last scene, that this affects prophecy as to who Israel is.
Yes.
In the book of Revelation, it'll talk about Israel, it'll talk about Babylon and so forth.
All right.
But what has happened is the ethnic implications have been removed.
Yes.
You see,
And,
it's no longer Israel in the ethnic limited sense, but now it's Israel, all who are in relationship
All right.
with
I want to
Jesus.
just spend a moment just looking at what God had in mind.
Yes.
And this will help us as we approach Revelation, isn't it?
Okay.
Really? So we can actually see from this map that God put them there in that little land of Palestine, a little coastal strip. Nations were mentioned in Old Testament times because they were north, south, east and west and affected God's people in that land. That's why it was important. And when Babylon came round, it came round the north through the Fertile Crescent down into Jerusalem when they opposed God's people. And when Cyrus came to take Babylon, we can see on the map, he came from the east, and the river of the water, Euphrates, later on, of course, was dried up. But everything in Old Testament times was figured in that land, wasn't it? That's the language that we find. But with this text we've got now from 1 Peter chapter 2 and other scriptures, of course, we're seeing now that the covenant, as you said, has been expanded. Once it was geographical, focused in Israel, but now it's worldwide. And as far as John is concerned in Revelation, prophecy will be fulfilled wherever God's people are. And we say, well, where are God's people? Well, they're in Russia and the United States and Australia and China and every nation, Africa. And so we've moved from a literal local to a worldwide spiritual concept as we read Revelation. And it does make a difference how we read the book. So let's just come back to our map again and see how John, in his book of Revelation, uses the language of the Old Testament. Now, if it had worked out with Israel in the Old Testament times, Ezekiel describes a power from the north called Gog and Magog coming down to invade the land of Palestine. But what does John do with Revelation do with Gog and Magog? He puts it later on, at the end of 1,000 years, when the whole earth finds a great resurrection of those who are unfaithful to God, and he says, Gog and Magog. So he takes that literal local scene and now he makes it like a worldwide concept. He also takes the fall of Babylon to describe what is happening at the end of the world as well. When Cyrus came from the east, he dried up the river Euphrates, and God's people held captive in Babylon were free now to go back to Jerusalem. But what John is doing now in Revelation is using the last night of Babylon as a language to describe what is happening to the end of the world. So this is how we can read Revelation. He's using the experiences of Israel in Old Testament times as if they were still living there, where nations north, south, east and west are mentioned, but now he's using it to describe what will happen on a worldwide scale. Yeah.
So we got started with Jezebel then. Here is a character that clearly doesn't belong in this time and place.
Yes.
John is simply taking that up. Jezebel no longer represents a particular country or even a particular faith.
Yes.
She is now used as a model for relationship to Christ.
Yes.
The dividing line in the world is no longer between countries, between ethnic groups, or even between particular religions.
Yes.
The dividing line in the world has to do with faith in the one that God sent to us.
But isn't it good news?
Yeah.
God treats us all the same, no matter what country you live in, what race. He doesn't care who your father or mother was. Are you Christ's? And I think that's so wonderful. And it said in that text in Peter, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which in time past had not received mercy, but now we have mercy. And he calls these people who receive this as, he uses a language to describe those who believe in Christ as the same sort of language he used around Sinai, priest, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These terms are now applied to all of us.
I'm wondering if we could possibly have that slide that's entitled Covenant to Prophecy, because that would just illustrate for the people what we're saying. You see, the things of Israel, they're ethnic. You know, a particular people in relationship with God is expanded to spiritual.
Yes.
Anyone who's in genuine relationship with Jesus is in genuine relationship with God and is added to Israel, becomes part of this larger picture.
Yes.
And in the book of Revelation, Euphrates River, Babylon, Israel, Egypt, these are all local geographical places in Old Testament times. Now in the book of Revelation, this is expanded to a worldwide context.
Yes.
That is so important because as we go through, this will impact everything we see
Absolutely.
in the book of Revelation.
Absolutely.
So at this time, we'll go to a break because Pamela is awaiting us in the interview room, and I think she's got some tough questions as usual. Welcome back. We're here in the interview room once again, where from time to time Pamela will ask us questions that graduate school certainly didn't prepare me for. And, you know, I think it's possible, Pamela, that Graham is still shaking a little bit from the first time you asked a question.
She's really a nice person.
Oh, I know that,
and,
but these
she's
are important
asking the
questions.
tough ones. She's asking the tough ones.
That's
and
right.
We've got to live in that world. Yeah, thank you for it.
All right, but you have some questions about what we've been talking about in this particular episode.
Well, it's about compromise. I mean, isn't it okay to compromise a little bit? I mean, you know, just to get along, you have to compromise just somewhat, don't you?
Well, people are often called uncompromising, and it's held against them, isn't it? Yeah, this person just won't give an inch. You know, that's uncompromising. Sometimes we, you know, how do you get the balance? That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it depends on how you define terms and so forth. What we are talking about is basically this. A bottom line here is authenticity. When you bring in things, you believe things that don't really fit with each other, there's kind of a dissonance inside. It's like you're not real. You're being pulled in different directions at different times. And certainly when biblical faith is mixed with some other alternatives, then it creates this situation where a person struggles to know who they really are. It struggles with identity. And I think that's a major issue in today's world. People want to have an identity. They want to know who they are. They want to have a focus, a mission, a purpose. And that's why we're concerned about this, because that's part of our mission here. Hope, meaning, purpose. Be clear on who we are. Be clear on where we're going.
So exactly how do individuals compromise?
Well, I think that often happens. There can be pressure from outside. Other people can put on pressure because they want you to conform to what they want you to do. And so you have your own mission in life, and people are trying to steer you away from that mission in another direction. So this could be one way that a person is pushed to compromise. We saw also in places in the ancient Rome that there would be legal issues, pressures coming in, that people would say, if either you do it this way, or you will die, or we'll put you in prison, and things like that. So I think individuals are constantly called upon to compromise their true identity. And that's the key thing here. If you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, anything that compromises that, anything that pulls you away from that central purpose is ultimately going to drag you down. So that becomes, I think, the critical issue when it comes to individuals and compromise. So.
All right.
Okay.
It's a hard one, isn't it? It's a very hard one. Where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
And I guess it's something we have to work out ourselves sometimes, because if we're not careful, it can come between us and God. But we saw in our last section about Thyatira, there were people who did remain loyal to God, and they did remain firm, and they are called the rest, or the remnant. And this is mentioned in Revelation chapter 2, verse 24, of a people who remained faithful to God. And I think they'd be commended for that.
So that's a whole people you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I remember you asking during the break, what does it mean when a whole religion compromises And so that was a very, very interesting question, because it led me to realize that whole religions can compromise. And I think what happens is every religion is a response to God in some way, a response to something that God has brought in. And people are trying to be faithful to God, trying to stay true to that purpose. But you know what happens? Anytime you institutionalize religion, there's kind of a corporate selfishness that comes in. The institution can move away from its mission to self-preservation. To, you know, whatever we do here is what keeps the mission intact, but it's a self-focused mission. Israel's mission was designed to bless the world. But when religions sometimes focus on themselves, they compromise, in a sense, not for God, but in order to accomplish the mission of their own devising. So compromise, I think, is deadly, whether it's institutional, individual, all the way through.
So we'd probably say there is a time when you would compromise and a time we wouldn't. And how do you draw the line is the question, isn't it? And what is selling out and copying out, and what is being a negotiable type of person? We hate that person being too rigid. I think what's here in Revelation 2 verse 24 is this concept of there was in this church a people who remained loyal to Jesus. And it doesn't mean to say everybody's going to be exactly the same, but whatever affects our loyalty to Jesus, I'm surely is a dividing point here, isn't it? And if you're in a right relationship with Jesus, you know that God loves and accepts you. You know, you're not a slave to what other people think. Now, knowing God loves and cares for you, I love the illustration of a man and wife who deeply love each other. They're not easily made jealous by a third party. They love and trust each other, just like you both do. You feel secure, you feel relaxed, because of that love relationship. And so a Christian who really loves Jesus and knows that God loves and accepts them, they have a sense of identity, and they're no longer a slave to what other people really do think. And I want to appeal to people who are watching this program too, to have a love relationship with Jesus. Don't be a slave to other people and what they think. Your first loyalty, no matter what happens, is to Jesus. Now, coming up in our next program, we're going to talk about how to be an authentic Christian. This is a very big factor. How to be real, how to be genuine. That's our next program, and thank you very much for watching this one. We look forward to meeting with you next time.
If you've enjoyed this presentation on the Book of Revelation and would like more information, visit www.revelation.hope.meaning.purpose. You can purchase your own DVD set of this series or the booklets, which cover the content of each program.